Kingdom Come: Deliverance claims no fantasy, no magic, just history. Set in 15th century Bohemia, it's one of the few games to attempt a fully grounded medieval world. But how much of what you see is actually accurate? This video breaks down the game's depiction of 1403 Bohemia, comparing its world, systems, and characters to historical records. Kingdom Come: Deliverance recreates a narrow strip of central Bohemia, set in the year 1403. The playable area spans roughly 16 square kilometers and includes several real towns and castles, such as Rate, Talmberg, Sassau, and Skalitz. These aren't fictional approximations, they're mapped directly from real-world locations in what is now the Czech Republic. Skalitz, for example, is modelled on the modern town of Stříbrná Skalice, and its proximity to the Sázava monastery, Sassau in-game, matches historical geography. Deliverance 2 picks up where the original left off, continuing Henry's story across newly added regions like Kutna Hora, historically one of Europe's richest silver mining cities. Roads and trade routes are another area where the game mirrors reality. The winding dirt paths that connect settlements aren't random. They follow medieval trade and communication lines typical of the period. These were often built around rivers, elevation, and agricultural zones. Players can trace a route between Sassau and Rate that reflects real logistical considerations of medieval travel. It's not a fast travel network disguised as a map, it's a living infrastructure system. Castles are also rendered with attention to historical detail. Talmberg, for instance, is based on a ruined fortress near the village of Talmberg. Warhorse Studios used archaeological reports and surviving documentation to reconstruct its appearance. This includes details like timber walkways, stone curtain walls, and wooden hoardings over the battlements. Interiors, such as the Lord's Hall, kitchens, and guard towers, also reflect 15th century standards, not fantasy embellishments. The political situation is equally grounded. In 1403, Bohemia was in crisis. King Wenceslaus IV, son of Charles IV, had been captured by his brother Sigismund of Hungary. This created a power vacuum, especially in rural areas, where rival lords jockeyed for control and mercenary bands acted with near total autonomy. The game reflects this instability. Many of the game's quests and conflicts are rooted in that decentralized violence, lords calling in favors, townsmen caught in shifting allegiances, and outlaws exploiting the lack of royal authority. The depiction of social hierarchy is particularly rigid, and accurately so. Players are constantly reminded that Henry, as a commoner, has little authority. Nobles speak down to him, guards harass him, and even skilled tradesmen view him with suspicion. While the game allows the player to gain influence through quests, it never lets Henry forget his place in the feudal order. This mirrors the real stratification of medieval Bohemia, where birth determined one's legal status, profession, and access to justice. These themes persist in Kingdom Come: Deliverance 2, where Henry still grapples with his social status. Despite expanding the world and narrative, the sequel keeps him grounded in his role as a blacksmith's son, navigating a rigid feudal system. There are, however, some anachronisms. The spacing of villages and the lack of filth in streets are slightly sanitized for modern players. Likewise, the density of settlements in the game world is compressed for gameplay. Rate and Talmberg are within minutes of each other, though in reality the distances would be greater. Still, the overall effect is surprisingly authentic. Kingdom Come doesn't just drop medieval assets into a sandbox. It reconstructs a specific time and place using historical records, archaeological surveys, and period-accurate geography. Few games have attempted this level of specificity, and fewer still have succeeded. Daily life in Kingdom Come: Deliverance is intentionally slow. You eat, you sleep, you bleed, and you stink. That alone sets it apart from most medieval-themed games, but it also opens the door to examine how well it captures the rhythms of life in 1403 Bohemia. The peasant lifestyle is a central focus, and largely accurate. Most people lived in small timber-framed houses with thatched roofs, heated by a central hearth. The game reflects this. Villages like Skalitz are filled with low wooden homes clustered near farmland or forests. NPCs follow daily routines, waking at dawn, working in fields or workshops, then returning home to eat and sleep. These behaviours aren't just for show, they mimic real medieval patterns of labour, which were dictated by daylight, seasons, and the church calendar. Food is another area where the game avoids fantasy excess. Henry eats bread, cabbage, cheese, lentils, and dried meat, staples for peasants in Central Europe. Wealthier NPCs have access to better cuts of meat or imported goods like wine, but those are rare and expensive. Inns serve stews and beer, not feasts. The game also tracks food spoilage, requiring players to eat regularly but avoid rotten meals. It's a system that mirrors the medieval reliance on preservation methods like smoking, salting, and pickling, all of which were common in Bohemia at the time. Clothing is also time appropriate. Peasants wear coarse wool or linen tunics, often belted with rope or leather. Nobles wear brighter colours and finer fabrics like velvet or silk, sometimes with embroidery or fur trim. Head coverings, hose, and layered garments are all consistent with 15th century Bohemian dress codes. Visuals aren't exaggerated. Henry starts out in patched clothing and doesn't get much better unless he earns it. Religion plays a central role, just as it did historically. Bohemia in 1403 was devoutly Catholic, with the Hussite movement still a decade away. Churches and monasteries dominate the skyline of every town. The game includes mass attendance, confession, religious festivals, and monastic life at Sasau Abbey. Players even participate in monastic routines, copying manuscripts and observing silence. The depiction of monks, relics, and theological debates is grounded in real historical tension, particularly over church corruption, which would soon lead to major uprisings. Superstition and folk belief are subtly included. NPCs reference astrology, herbal remedies, and omens. While not overtly magical, these beliefs mirror the popular religiosity of the era. Characters visit herbalists, avoid cursed areas, and fear excommunication or damnation. The line between science and superstition is blurred, which reflects the period accurately. The role of women is more complicated. Teresa's playable section in A Woman's Lot shows the vulnerability of peasant women. She faces assault, caretaking duties, and economic hardship. Her story aligns with the historical reality that women were largely excluded from legal protection and formal power. However, the game also includes some anachronistic dialogue and autonomy, likely to support modern player expectations. While women did work as brewers, healers, or merchants, their legal and social freedoms were sharply limited. In short, Kingdom Come Deliverance captures the constraints, routines, and hierarchies of medieval life with unusual precision. It doesn't just use medieval aesthetics, it tries to simulate the culture, and for the most part, it succeeds. The game's attention to labour, religion, and daily survival reflects a world where life was short, work was constant, and divine order was unquestioned. Combat in Kingdom Come Deliverance isn't cinematic. It's claustrophobic, methodical, and often messy. The game system was designed with input from historical European martial arts, HEMA, practitioners, aiming to reflect real 15th century fighting techniques. The result is one of the most grounded melee systems in gaming, but not without compromise. The core of the game's melee combat is its directional strike system. Players choose from 6 angles to attack or defend, emulating the techniques described in manuals by fencing masters like Johannes Lichtenauer. Feints, clinches, riposts, and master strikes are all based on actual martial systems. For example, the Zornhau or Wrath Cut, a diagonal strike meant to interrupt an opponent's attack, is present both in-game and in period manuscripts. Armour too is handled with unusual accuracy. Plate armour is not portrayed as heavy or encumbering, because it wasn't. A full suit weighed around 20 to 25 kilograms and was distributed evenly across the body, allowing for surprising mobility. The game reflects this. Wearing full armour slows you down only slightly, and heavily armoured opponents are hard to kill without aiming for gaps or wearing them down. Chainmail, padded gambesons, and plate pieces can all be layered, just as they were historically. Weapons are matched to roles and classes. Longswords, short swords, sabres, polearms, and maces all have distinct stats and uses. Bows are viable, but require skill and stamina. Crossbows, which were common in the region at the time, are notably absent in the first game, which was unfortunately due to development compromises. That omission is corrected in Deliverance 2. The sequel introduces crossbows and even early gunpowder weapons, aligning more closely with the real military technologies of early 15th century Bohemia. These additions broaden combat options without sacrificing realism. Mounted combat is included, but simplified. Real mounted warfare involved tightly trained cavalry units, shock charges, and high-maintenance horses. The game reflects only a portion of this. Horseback attacks are viable, but lack the full dynamics of mounted formations or the logistical complexity behind cavalry use. Still, features like saddlebags, horse armour, and warhorse breeds nod to historical detail. One of the most grounded mechanics is stamina. Each swing, block, or dodge consumes energy. This mirrors the reality of medieval combat, where exhaustion was often deadlier than injury. Fights don't last long because they can't. Most were decided in moments, and prolonged duels were rare. The game punishes flailing and rewards control, which is more accurate than most games allow. Injuries are treated seriously. Bleeding, broken limbs, and concussions impact Henry's performance until treated. Bandages, healing potions, and visits to a bathhouse or apothecary are required. This reflects the brutality of medieval combat, where infection and trauma were more dangerous than the initial wound. That said, there are concessions. The AI is inconsistent, group fights can be gamed, and certain weapon types are underpowered for balance reasons. Combat is also far cleaner than it was historically. There's no mud, no real blood pooling, and weapons don't break or rust under use. But overall, Kingdom Come Deliverance sets a high bar. It treats combat as a system of discipline, training, and attrition, not a power fantasy. Most games simplify the past to make players feel heroic. This one reminds you that in 1403, staying alive was the achievement. Few RPGs tie game mechanics so closely to historical plausibility. Kingdom Come Deliverance builds its systems around what a commoner in 1403 might realistically learn, achieve, or fail at. The result is a gameplay loop that forces players to think like a medieval person, within a rigid social structure, with limited access to knowledge, and constantly aware of survival. Take reading, for example. Henry starts the game illiterate, which was the norm for his class. Literacy rates in medieval Bohemia were extremely low outside the clergy and upper nobility. Learning to read isn't just a skill point, it's a quest. Henry must pay for lessons, travel to a scribe, and complete exercises to improve comprehension. Even then, early text appears scrambled and hard to decipher, simulating what reading actually felt like to someone encountering it for the first time. Alchemy functions like real proto-science. Players follow period-accurate recipes using medieval ingredients, valerian, thistle, marigold, and prepare them via boiling, grinding, or distillation. There's no magical transmutation here. Healing potions, poison, and even schnapps are made in line with medieval herbalism. The game even includes an alembic and mortar and pestle, mimicking the setup found in 15th century apothecaries. It's not streamlined. It's a process, and that's the point. Hunting is similarly grounded. Animals react to noise, scent, and movement. Players must track, shoot, and field dress game, often illegally. In 1403, hunting was a tightly controlled right of the nobility. Commoners caught poaching could face execution. The game mirrors this through reputation systems and guard patrols. If you're caught with a bow in a restricted area, expect questions. Lockpicking and pickpocketing, while gamified, reflect the growing problem of rural crime during Bohemia's power vacuum. As feudal control weakened, banditry increased. The game's reputation mechanics reinforce this stealing, affects your standing in towns, and bribing guards is often your only way out. It's risk management in a world where justice is swift and favours the wealthy. Crafting and maintenance are slower than players might expect. You can build swords from scratch, you maintain them. Weapons and armour degrade with use, and Henry must visit a blacksmith or learn to sharpen and repair tools himself. Clothes get dirty, armour gets dented, and your reputation suffers if you walk into town covered in blood or looking ragged. It's not aesthetic, it affects gameplay. Even health and hygiene are tied to systems. Eating spoiled food causes sickness. Sleeping in the wild affects stamina. Visiting bathhouses heals wounds, cleans clothing, and can even serve as a social interaction hub. In a world without antibiotics, basic hygiene was a survival tool, and the game reflects this with surprising depth. Time is also a system. Travel takes hours. Shops close at sundown. Quests can fail if you delay. The world doesn't wait for Henry, and that's historically accurate. Life in medieval Europe was dictated by sunlight, season, and obligation. The game forces players to consider time as a resource, not a backdrop. This commitment to realism makes Kingdom Come's systems slower, harder, and more frustrating than most RPGs. But that's the design. It's not trying to make you feel powerful. It's trying to show you how hard survival was in a real medieval world, where knowledge was rare, labour was constant, and the odds were never in your favour. While Kingdom Come Deliverance isn't a straight retelling of history, it's a fictional story set within a very real moment. The year is 1403, and the Kingdom of Bohemia is on the edge of collapse. Its king, Wenceslaus IV, has been captured by his half-brother Sigismund of Hungary. Bohemia's royal authority is paralysed, and opportunistic nobles begin carving up territory for themselves. Warhorse Studios didn't invent this crisis. It's one of the most unstable periods in the region's medieval history. Several characters in the game are drawn directly from historical records. Sir Radzig Kobyla, Henry's lord, and a central figure in the narrative, was a real Czech noble. Records show he was appointed Burgrave of Prague Castle and served under Wenceslaus IV before eventually resisting Sigismund's occupation. While the game doesn't strictly follow his biography, Radzig's involvement in regional defence and his opposition to Sigismund are grounded in fact. Hans Capon, another key NPC, is also based on a real person, Jan Tacek of Perkstein, nicknamed the Birdie. He was a young nobleman with ties to Radzig's family, known for his later role in resisting the Hussite uprising. The game portrays him as a spoiled but well-meaning aristocrat, which is speculation, but not implausible given his youth and position at the time. The capture of Wenceslaus IV by Sigismund, referenced frequently in game, is a confirmed historical event. It took place in early 1402, with Wenceslaus held for over a year. Sigismund used this power vacuum to invade Bohemia, employing German and Hungarian mercenaries, exactly the kind of raiders seen attacking Skalitz in the game's opening sequence. The destruction of Skalitz itself is not fully documented, but it's consistent with the kinds of raids that took place during this period. Bohemian silver mines were valuable targets, and Skalitz was a real mining town. The game's depiction of its burning, looting, and population displacement is a plausible dramatization of the kind of chaos that accompanied Sigismund's push into central Bohemia. Sasau Monastery is another historically grounded location. Known today as Sazava Monastery, it was a centre of Slavic liturgy and scriptural copying. The game's inclusion of a monastic scriptorium, religious disputes, and even the playable monastery sequence reflects the real tension between Reformist and Orthodox Catholic factions. It also foreshadows the ideological conflict that would erupt just a decade later with the Hussite Wars. That said, Kingdom Come doesn't aim to tell the full story. Jan Hus, arguably the most important religious figure in Czech history, is never seen, mentioned briefly in some dialogue and codex entries. His movement was already gaining momentum by 1403. The Hussite Reformation would define Bohemia's political and religious identity for the next century, but it's outside the game's timeframe. In the end, Kingdom Come Deliverance walks a careful line. It grounds its fiction in real events, references historical figures accurately, and captures the atmosphere of a nation on the brink. It doesn't tell the whole story, no game could, but it tells a story that fits cleanly into the cracks left by history. And as always, thank you so much for watching.